Chapter 15. Tongue-Tied Proposal. The year was 1933. Even though William Branham was now the pastor of his own congregation and preached every Sunday morning at the old Masonic Hall in Jeffersonville, all through the summer of 1933 he continued to attend Sunday night and Wednesday night services at the Missionary Baptist Church. Admittedly, this was an excuse to be with his girlfriend, Hope Brumbach, rather than to hear Dr. Davis preach. But now that his own church building would soon be finished, this would change, since he would be holding his own midweek services. How could he see his girlfriend then? Bill had always been bashful and insecure around the feminine sex. The thought of losing his ready-made excuse to see Hope put him in a sweat of anxiety. Bill cherished every minute he spent with Hope. When she smiled, he smiled. When she laughed, he laughed. She held some kind of magic over him that he didn't understand, but he loved it. To him she seemed like everything good and beautiful in the world, air and rain, summer and flowers, kindness and desire. The more he was around her, the more he wanted to be around her. What would happen to their relationship if he didn't have an excuse to see her every Wednesday night? Would she drift away from him? Bill shivered at the thought. What if she found another boyfriend? Bill could barely breathe just thinking about it. He couldn't risk losing her. How could he live? No, he had to come up with another good excuse to see her on a regular basis. At some point, as Bill turned the problem over and over in his mind, it occurred to him that the best way to spend more time with Hope Brumbach was to change her last name to Branham. The minute he decided to ask Hope to marry him, his doubts tortured him from a different angle. Her father made $500 a month as the head of a labor union, the local brotherhood of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Billy, on the other hand, was making 20 cents an hour working for the Public Utility Company and was helping to support his mother, father, 7 brothers, and 1 sister, all on his meager earnings. How could he support a wife? All he had to offer her was his love and devotion. Who was he to take Hope from her comfortable home and subject her to the struggles of poverty? She deserved so much more than that. After much anguish of soul and mind, Bill decided he couldn't ask Hope to marry him. He loved her too much to spoil her life. The decision didn't end his suffering. It simply opened up another dilemma. If he wasn't ever going to ask Hope to marry him, how could he justify taking up any of her time? Wouldn't she be better off if he broke off their relationship altogether? The sooner he quit seeing her, the sooner she could find someone else, some man who could give her a good life. Yes, that was the right thing to do, and that was what he must do, but as much as Bill thought about it would be in Hope's best interest for him to say goodbye, he could not bring himself to do it. He recalculated his financial position and his possibilities. Some of his brothers were old enough now that they too were helping his mother with the family bills. That was a plus. And the other brothers were not far behind. In a few more years they would be doing their share to help. Another plus. Perhaps Bill could reduce his support gradually without causing any extra hardship on his mother. Then if he worked very hard, maybe he could make a decent living for Hope after all. His excitement mounted as he considered the possibility from various angles. Yes, it looked like he could swing it financially. Should he do it? Yes. Yes, he would. He would ask Hope Brumbach to be his wife. But making the decision to ask her and actually asking her were two different things. As the month of August cycled into September, Bill struggled to muster enough nerve to ask the decisive question. He would gaze at her dark eyes and radiant smile and think, "My, wouldn't we be happy together?" But every time he would start the question, his mouth dried up and a lump formed in his throat so that he could barely swallow, let alone produce an understandable sentence. Every night he was with her, he tried again, but the words just refused to come out. He would say to himself, "Tonight I'll do it. Not 10 minutes more will go by on my watch until I ask her. It didn't do any good. The time ticked right on by, and he couldn't bring himself to propose. Bill agonized over his problem for hours on end. Sometimes he would stop in a ditch where he was working, rest his chin on a shovel handle, and just stare at the horizon, while his brain scratched and dug for the answer in the fertile soil of his mind. How was he ever going to let her know that he wanted to marry her if he didn't have the nerve to speak up? For a while he toyed with the idea of having his friend, George d'Arc, ask her for him, but that just didn't seem right. Hope might even refuse him on those terms. How then could he manage it? How? Suddenly he struck an idea. That's it! He would write her a letter. That Sunday night Bill stayed up late with paper and pen, laboring over every sentence, composing and rewriting, sweating until the two-dimensional sheet of paper expressed his feelings as best he could make it. With his Herculean feat behind him, his first inclination was to hand the letter to Hope in person. Then he thought of Hope reading that letter silently while he stood by twiddling his thumbs and biting his lip, feeling so nervous he could easily faint. No, that wouldn't do. He decided he would mail it. If he mailed the letter Monday, Hope would get it Tuesday, and she could give him her answer Wednesday night when he took her to church. It seemed like a good plan at the time. Monday morning, Bill licked a stamp, stuck it on the envelope, and dropped the letter in a mailbox on his way to work. Later that day, while he was digging a ditch, a horrifying thought struck him. What if Hope's mother got a hold of that letter? Bill's forehead beaded with sweat and his knees weakened so that he had to lean up against the side of the ditch for support. He thought, if her mother reads that letter, I'm sunk. Bill got along fine with Hope's father, Charlie, but her mother was a different story. Prim and proper, Mrs. Brumbach prided herself on her high social standing in the community. She lived in a beautiful home, wore expensive clothes, attended a large formal church, and belonged to numerous influential organizations. She considered Bill Branham to be just another plowboy, definitely not classy enough to marry her daughter. She also took a dim view of Bill's narrow-minded religious convictions. If she saw that letter, she would probably object strenuously. She might even go so far as to make Hope break up with him. Bill shuddered at the thought. On Wednesday evening, Bill pulled up behind the Brumbach's shiny new Buick. He left the door open on his rattletrap Ford just in case Mrs. Brumbach had read the letter and he had to drive away in a hurry. Hope answered his knock. "Hello, Billy, won't you come in?" "Oh, no," thought Bill. "You'll get me in there where your mother and you'll shut the door. Then I'll be in an awful fix." He smiled weakly and said, "Thanks, Hope, but it's kind of warm. I'll just wait out here on the porch until you're ready." "Oh, step in. Mother and Dad want to see you." Bill thought, "Oh my, it's all up now." He nervously stepped inside, took off his hat, and stood next to the door, ready for a quick escape. Hope said, "Go on into the kitchen where Mother and Dad are. I'll be ready for church in just a few minutes." Bill walked to the kitchen door. Hope's parents were sitting at the kitchen table. "How do you do, Mr. Brumbach?" "How do, Mrs. Brumbach?" Charlie Brumbach, always cordial, said, "Hello, Billy. Won't you come in and have a glass of iced tea?" "No, thanks. I'm not thirsty." "Well, why don't you come in here and sit down anyway?" The conspiracy seemed to be deepening. Bill's heart thumped wildly. "No, thanks. I'll stay in here if you don't mind. Sure is fine weather we're having." Mrs. Brumbach said, "Yes, wonderful weather." The three of them chatted about the weather and other incidentals until Hope came downstairs. Bill didn't breathe easier until he and Hope were standing on the porch with the front door safely shut behind them. "Billy, it's such a lovely evening. Let's walk to church." A new chill of dread swept over Bill. He thought, "This is it. She's going to tell me we're finished. I'd better look at her good because it's probably the last time I will get to be with her." Hope didn't mention the letter on their way to church. That left Bill to suffer in a whirlwind of anxiety through the entire service. He didn't hear a word Dr. Davis preached. Instead, he spent the time gazing at Hope out of the corner of his eye, thinking about how much he hated to lose her. She was such a decent girl. Tonight she looked more radiant than ever. He hoped she would get someone that would be good to her. She deserved the best life had to offer. It was dark by the time Bill and Hope got out of church and started for home. A quarter of a moon hung like a street lamp in the night sky. Whenever they would step out from the shadows of the trees, the bright moonlight would contrast Hope's black hair and dark eyes with her soft white cheeks. Bill quaked inside with love and longing. "Well, Billy, how did you like the service tonight?" Hope asked casually. "Oh, it was all right, I guess." Bill felt like his jaw was made out of cardboard. It seemed so stiff and useless. He watched Hope's face for a frown or any other hint that might forewarn him that the dreaded moment had arrived. Every time she moved her lips to start talking, Bill was sure that the end had come. But instead she would toss out another breezy remark, as though nothing was on her mind except the pleasures of an Indian summer. Since they were getting close to the house, and she still had not mentioned the letter, Bill began to suspect that she hadn't received it at all. Maybe it got hung up in the mailbox or lost in the post office. Something must have happened to it. If Hope had read it, surely she would have mentioned it by now. Bill's composure returned and his tongue loosened up. He reached over and took Hope's arm. He was feeling good. They were almost to her house now. During a natural break in the conversation, Hope said, "Billy, I got your letter." A chill slithered up Bill's spine. A lump swelled up in his throat and began to choke off his air so that he could barely breathe. He swallowed hard and managed to croak. "You did?" Hope said, "Mm-hmm," and kept on walking. The strain on Bill felt unbearable. He thought, "Woman, say something before I faint." But Hope seemed content to let her words hang in the air without further comment. Bill thought, "Then I've got to say something because we're just a few doors from her house." He mustered up all his courage and said, "Did you read it?" She answered, "Uh-huh," and that was all. Bill felt like he was going insane from suspense. "Did you like it?" Her lips curved in a little impish smile. "Oh, it was all right." Bill felt a rush of adrenaline. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Hope?" "Bill, I would love to marry you," she said. "I love you." The next day, Bill and Hope drove downtown to visit a jewelry store. Bill paid $8 for a wedding ring set. He clipped the wedding ring to a catch pin in his pocket so it wouldn't accidentally get lost. Then he held Hope's graceful finger gently in his calloused hand and started to slip on the engagement ring. Hope stopped him. "Billy, don't you think it would be kind of gentlemanlike if you asked Mother and Dad first?" Bill felt the muscles of his heart skip a beat. "Oh, my," he thought, "here we go again." He was afraid that if Mrs. Brumbach objected strongly enough, Hope might back out. Slowly, reluctantly, he got the words out. "Yes, I suppose so." Then he had an idea. "Look, Hope, when we get married, it's always going to be 50-50, isn't it?" "That's right, I'll keep my part." "And I will mine. What do you say we start right now? You ask your mother, and I'll ask your dad." Hope shrugged. "That sounds fine to me." "Perhaps you should let me ask your dad first," Bill suggested shrewdly. He wanted to get Charlie's promise before Mrs. Brumbach knew anything about it. That seemed to him like his best chance. "Will you ask him soon?" "I'll do it Sunday night." The next Sunday night, after Bill brought Hope home from church, the two of them sat on the living room floor listening to the Victrola phonograph. Charlie Brumbach was typing at his desk. Mrs. Brumbach sat in a cushy Morris chair, crocheting. Hope frowned at Bill, motioning with her head towards her father. Bill shook his head and motioned towards her mother. He couldn't ask her father now, not with her mother sitting in the room. It would be like asking them both. Her mother might kick up a fuss and Bill might end up with nothing. Bill stood up. "It's 9:30. I guess I'd better be on my way." Hope walked him to the door, holding his hand. He said good night and tried to walk away, but she wouldn't let go of his hand. She whispered, Aren't you going to ask him? I can't ask him with your mother sitting there. Then I'll go back in and you can call him out. That seemed awkward to Bill, but he couldn't think of anything better. Okay. Hope walked back into the living room. Bill cleared his throat. Mr. Brumbach, could I speak to you just a minute? Charlie stopped typing and turned around in his chair. Sure, Bill, what do you want? I mean out in the porch. Mrs. Brumbach looked up from her crocheting and raised her eyebrows inquisitively. Charlie said, Sure, and he followed Bill out on the front porch, shutting the door behind him. Bill gazed at the moon hanging just above the tree line. Sure is a pretty night, isn't it? Sure is, Charlie agreed. Sure has been awful warm lately. Sure has. Bill stuttered for the right words. You know, I was, wondering if... You can have her, Bill. Relief flushed through him. He wanted to hug Mr. Brumbach, but limited himself to squeezing his hand. Charlie, you know I'm a pauper. I can't take care of her as good as you do. I'm only earning 20 cents an hour. But Charlie, she couldn't find anybody that loves her more than I do. I'll work until my hands are bloody to make her a living. I'll live true to her. I'll do everything I can to make her happy. Charlie laid his big hand on Bill's shoulder. Billy, I know you love her, and I know she loves you. I'd rather you have her on those grounds than somebody that would mistreat her, no matter how much money he had. Besides, it's not what you have in life that counts. It's how contented you are with what you have. Thank you, Charlie. I'll remember that. Bill never did ask Hope what her mother said when she asked her. It was enough to know that Mrs. Brumbach would not stand in their way. The wedding date was scheduled for June of the following year.